Hello and welcome back to the second season of the Starter Set. I'm one of your hosts, Mark, and I got with me in the studio tonight, Gibby and DB. And boys, it's good to be back in the studio talking about card games with you guys.
Card games. We're talking card games.
We're talking about card games. Yeah.
You made it sound so sinister.
Well, we're up late at night and it's dark outside, so we're like, I don't know, crooks.
We're ruminating over all of the bad deeds we're going to do in the midnight hours.
Yeah, certainly something like that. But yeah, we're back in the studio, the digital studio. We're talking about card games tonight. We want to kick off with a question. DVN came up with this one. I think it's a great question. What is your favorite card game of all time? In all of the games that we've played, what is our favorite card game of all time?
Not card game,
Gibby.
but card.
Card. I'm sorry. I said card game. I meant card. Our favorite. That's harder, though. Like, card game is one thing.
Yeah.
We talk about that all the time. Card is hard. Like, your favorite card amongst all the card games that you played. Your favorite card.
And
Gibby.
I'm sure if I really took the time, I might come up with something like in the back of my mind that I actually loved more. But this card, sometimes your first guess is your best guess right on a test. And this card is from a game that both DB and I used to play all the time called Legends of the Five Rings. We both love and miss that game, and I believe Mark's pulling a picture of it up. My favorite card was from the Unicorn Clan. It was a staple in almost every Unicorn deck called Talisman of the Sun. So you could attach these cards to other cards. It gave a +1 to both military and political, which are two different types of conflicts that you could have, and it basically allowed you to maneuver around amongst your different locations that you had. You had 4 locations up at a time. Sometimes you could utilize your 5th, that was your home base, but you had these different locations, and you could shift the conflicts around to your other locations and get certain benefits and boosts off of them and really screw with your opponent's game plan. It was such a good card, and I think it enabled a lot of strategies for me too. So it was one of my favorite cards to like mentally think about, and I think this card made me grow as a game player with just thinking about how to strategize.
I can't tell the audience how much this messed me up playing against Gibby, and just every time I saw this, I just had this audible groan, and I just immediately started looking for a way to get rid of his stupid attachments, because I'm like, I can't with this card. It's going to make me miserable for the rest of the game.
The art is beautiful.
It's very pretty artwork. I mean, O5R had fantastic artwork, but I will say too, this was a very high skill card. And so like you really had to be thinking through not just what do I want, but in this card made you think, what does my opponent want and how can I best deny them that? It was a cool card, so great choice.
Yeah. DBN, how about you? Your favorite card? I'm going to pull it up, but your favorite card of all card games. I literally cannot believe this is the card, by the way. But go ahead.
So I'm on the record as really hating Yu-Gi-Oh! And by really hating Yu-Gi-Oh!, I mean I really hate what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has become, because this is the first game I cut my competitive teeth on, right? Like, I played Pokemon, but really just with my dad and 1 or 2 other friends that at that age, which was like, 6 through 8 is when I first tried Pokemon, right? Like, most kids didn't want to learn how to play it. And so I didn't have a lot of people to play with for Pokemon. But when I got into like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and kids were starting to get this new cool thing, Yu-Gi-Oh!, which the boys were all like, oh, I want Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards because they're cooler monsters than just Pokemon, right?
Pokemon are for babies.
Cool dragons and stuff. Really real edgelord artwork on a lot of these things. And admittedly, the anime was fun, right? And so everybody got into Yu-Gi-Oh! But about at that time, the kids started wanting to play against each other, because that was the thing that the show did so well for that game, was like, we're not just going to show Pokemon in the world. We're going to be the show is about playing the card game, so that made all the kids want to play the card game, right?
Only to be disappointed that your beast didn't get summoned on the board in front of you in 3D
battle
holograms.
disc.
They got a lot better. They got a lot better in the later the show went on at actually making. They followed their own rules of the game, because in the show they broke their own rules constantly.
Yeah, there's like no rules at all in the show.
But so I have one of my best memories with my dad. I have many, but was I was being given a bunch of cards that my friends didn't want. Right? They cracked a bunch of packs. They got all the cool Blue Eyes White Dragons and Summon Skulls and all that stuff. And I had a bunch of crappy cards that they didn't want. And my dad was like, "Well, we bought you some Pokemon cards, but I don't know about this Yu-Gi-Oh thing. Like, I don't, and so they weren't buying me cards for Yu-Gi-Oh. So, and we would always play like after school and at lunch and stuff, and I would always get my butt handed to me because I'm like, my cards aren't strong. They can't. I don't have anything that can beat up the Blue Eyes White Dragon. Like, nothing's strong enough, right? And so I sat down on the floor with my dad, and we spread out literally every single card that I owned, and then went through and just looked for a bunch of cards that were like now what we know to be stall and control tools. Right? But as a kid, I didn't get that. So I had Man-Eater Bug and things like that that could do things like when it flips up, you blow up their thing. So it would, and then I played a bunch of things that were like deal direct damage to the opponent. So I legit played a control burn deck at age like 9.
That's awesome.
Thanks to my dad helping me out, and eventually it turned into a more sophisticated burn deck, and I was the toast of the Yu-Gi-Oh town all through elementary school and middle school, and I would go and play in tournaments. And at the time, you could play a really cool burn strategy with this card, Stealth Bird, which I just became so obsessed with because you'd get to surprise your opponent by putting it face down so they don't know what they're hitting into, right? And you have some things in your deck where if they hit into it, they die. But you have some things in your deck like this where it's got good defense, but if they hit into it with something big, it'll go away. But they don't know what they're hitting into. And then what you do is you go, on your next turn, you flip it up voluntarily, do 1,000 points of damage, and then flip it right back down. And so it has the ability to flip up, deal damage, haha, and then run away again. And then you could even at one point have a card that allowed you to shuffle. Yeah, it would. You had a card that would allow you to shuffle all your face-down monsters and then put them back out so your opponent didn't know which one was which. That card wasn't that good, but for a while there, that was the funnest thing would be like, I've got a Stealth Bird, I've got a Man-Eater Bug, I've got all these weird things, and I'm shuffling them around. They don't know what they're hitting into. And so Stealth Bird was just a eternal inclusion for the 5 years that I played Yu-Gi-Oh! And went to local stores, even as a kid, and played in tournaments. And so I just have this super fond spot for this, way too intense looking bird.
I love that. Now, if I go back, I could probably pick one from most card games that I played, with the exception of Hearthstone. I don't know that I have a favorite card from Hearthstone. They all blend kind of together.
Grim Patron.
No, that wasn't it.
Everyone, get in here! Pile on!
So,
objectively, the best card in Hearthstone. I mean, it's not
one of the
subjective,
funnest.
it's objective. It's the best
One
card
of the
ever made
funnest.
in Hearthstone.
Yeah. If I had to pick, though, I think I would actually go back not that long ago. Not back to 6th grade with my water collection of Pokemon cards. Not back to 9th grade with my collection of big green beastie worms and Magic the Gathering. Or not even in 12th grade as I collected all of the black cards in Magic and began playing Hearthstone. I think I would go back to just a handful of years ago, and I'd go back to the Elder Scrolls Legends, a digital card game. I'm the only one to pick a digital card game here, guys. To Ashlander Punisher, a 4-mana 5/4 that was the red-green combo, which was one of my favorite things, was the cross factions in Tessel. But with Breakthrough, Pilfer, and Slay, +1/+0, basically trample, deal damage over top of any amount of health that you had. Pilfer and Slay meant that if it dealt damage to your face, and if it killed something, it got +1/+0, which allowed this thing to get really beefy, and with a couple of specific combos could just do immense amounts of damage if you could get some Pilfers and Slays off right before attacking with it. I really enjoyed this card, and for me, I think this was like sort of the quintessential good stuff cards that Tessel had, right? These just like pretty well statted with good abilities, just like chunky 3, 4, 5, and 6 drops. And Tessel had a lot of that. And that is what made me love Tessel so much, was the mid-range good stuff that game always provided, without infinite ability to remove them. So really enjoyed the Ashland Punisher. I don't know, thematically, maybe it's one of my favorite cards too. Just love the artwork.
Cool
love the
card.
red-green. Yeah, love the Archer faction. Yeah.
Well, and you're an Elder Scrolls fan through and through, like as deep in as you can get. And so something cool like this, where the artwork's just so, cool, and flavorful, and also leaning into your edgelord tendencies, like, know.
Edgelord tendency.
Yes, I had to pick something that was a little bit edgelord in the end of the day, which you would think is it is the perfect lead-in for what we're talking about right now on the starter set, which is the edgelord of edgelords when it comes to card games, and that is Warhammer 40K Warpforge, a new card game that has come out from Warpforge, that has come out from Games Workshop in October of 2023. We've been exploring it for a couple of weeks. We're going to talk a little bit about factions tonight. We're excited to do that. But before we talk about factions, we realized we didn't give an overview of how the game even plays. Like, we've played so many card games at this point, we just assume that you should know there's some really basic stuff that happens in a card game. But to be fair, with games like Marvel Snap and stuff now, if you're coming from a game like Marvel Snap, you might not actually know that Marvel Snap is abnormal in the card gaming genre in terms of how it plays. And so just to give you a quick overview of how the game plays, the game is played, you start with a leader on the battlefield. That leader has a base attack for both its physical attack, its ranged attack, and it has a pool of health. You lose the game when that leader loses its pool of health. You have a board where your leader starts in the middle, and you may place, we think, 4 on one side, 4 cart creatures on the other. So you can have a total of 8 additional minions and companions. Your deck is made up of a combination of 2 different types of cards: stratagem, which are basically spells in any other game, and then I guess, what are they, infantry or like vehicles? They have different keywords, but basically they're creatures that are going to have that attack stat.
The word you're looking for is
troops. Troops. Okay. Attack, melee damage, range damage, and then they'll also have a health pool. The energy system is very similar to Hearthstone, where you are going to gain 1 energy each round. You are only going to draw a singular card each turn as well, but the unique thing about this game is that your leader will also always put a card in your hand that goes away at the end of the round, and that card is going to be 2 energy. So in place of something like a hero power from Hearthstone, you get this, usually a stratagem that's going to put something onto the board or deal damage to something, that sort of emphasizes the way that your leader is going to play the game and can kind of be capitalized on. You do start with 2 energy in this game on round 1, and if you go second, you start with a special card in your hand that does something unique for you, and your faction will have a choice, I think, of maybe 1 of 4 of these different types of cards. There's only a handful of them that you can actually get your hands on. Nope, it looks like maybe more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. Maybe there's 3? I can't tell. I think there's 3
for each.
Yeah, 3 for each faction, and they vary in cost and vary in ability. The other thing that I do think is an important thing to emphasize is attacker has priority. So unlike Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone or Legends of Runeterra, where you attack as the attacker and then your opponent chooses who blocks, in this game it is a lot like Hearthstone, Elder Scrolls, or Gwent, or a lot of other card games, where when your minions, you choose to send them to attack, your troops attack. Those troops are going to choose what they attack, and then they're going to get attacked back. Unlike Magic the Gathering, your troops do maintain their damage from round to round, like in Hearthstone and a lot of other digital card games. I think that's about everything. I don't think I missed any important pieces.
I think you did
that was
long.
It is, it is like firmly in the board-based combat genre, as opposed to like something like Marvel Snap or Gwent, where you're putting units up and counting up power, or So
which I think was shown.
Sorry, go ahead.
Look at us talking over one another. I think it was shown in our episode last week when we talked about the fact that there really wasn't a ton of innovation outside of the ranged attack and melee attack, because it is a very standard card game.
Yeah.
In that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we wanted to do, though, is go over the 6 factions, because this game wants you to play a faction. Its monetary system wants you to play and focus in on a faction. It is not like other card games where you're going to get the chance to spread out and choose a whole bunch of different stuff In this game, you are going to get pushed into focusing on unlocking a faction's quest line, unlocking a factions like free stuff, completing quests for that faction, all those sorts of things. Really, really want you to have faction sort of loyalty in this game. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time going over what we've experienced with the 6 factions quickly, so you can make an informed choice as to maybe what faction is going to be best for you. DBN, do you, or is it Gibby? I can't remember who I said. Is it Gibby? Gibby, Gibby's going to start us off. Gibby, pick a faction and tell us about one of the ones that you played.
Yeah, I'll pick the one that I started off. I'm going to ramp up. Of the 2 that I was responsible for and was interested in playing, I'm going to pick the one that maybe wasn't as exciting as I thought it was going to be. Granted, it's the one I talked a little bit about briefly last episode on our intro to Warpforge. It's the Simhan, or also known as the Aldar. So they are these like robotic-looking like space ninjas is how I'm going to talk about it. It's kind of a vague concept, but you'll get it by the art that Mark is sharing on the screen. So the Simhan, they play with these Spirit Stones, which is one of 2 factions, from what I understand, that leaves these certain kind of resources behind. The other one is going to be the other faction I'm going to be talking about. So they leave behind Spirit Stones, which eventually can be picked up and collected by you on your turn if a unit dies. And they can be used as like a later resource in the game, so almost like a little bit of like resource extension, which I know DBN is a big fan of resource extension in card games. And then they also have another really positive and really powerful keyword, in my opinion, called shurikens. Shurikens are amazing at eliminating units as they come down. They deal damage before the actual trade of damage unit conflict happens. So you initiate an attack, and let's say your unit says shuriken 2. That means you do 2 damage to that unit before the actual damage stat on your character goes off. So, for example, the Falcon that Mark has showing on the screen, you would do Shuriken 3, you'd do 3 damage, and if that 3 damage killed the unit that you were attacking, there wouldn't be any damage conflict to be able to resolve between you and your opponent, so you wouldn't take any damage back. So shurikens are really, really good at eliminating units quickly and getting them out of the way and building that board state tempo without having to do the unit trading that otherwise might kind of keep you on a neutral playing field as you move into the mid and late game against your opponent. Spirit Stones are great for gaining energy and resources. I think from my experience on playing the Simhan and focusing on the Spirit Stones, utilizing some of the starter decks that they give you in hand, you do want to wait to upgrade your collection a bit if you are going to play Spirit Stones. It does appear that within the Simhan that there are some very good Spirit Stone centric cards that you gain access to later, or maybe want 2 of instead of the maybe a 1 of that is included in a starter deck to really shore it up. Spirit Stones can be a little bit tougher to work around and utilize properly if you don't have density of cards that work around Spirit Stones in your deck. In my opinion, my favorite deck that I got to play of the starter deck, so if you were interested in playing the Simhan, I would lean towards the Shredding Fire starter deck, as what it's labeled. Simhan has some of the best flying and like sniper units in the game, and some of the best vehicles is kind of one of the things that they're known for is their vehicle usage. The Shredding Fire takes advantage of not only having shuriken units to be able to own the early game and into the mid game, but utilizing some of the vehicles and things like that to just continue to stifle your opponent's game plan and just like shut them out of their own board if you can get on board and get established before they do. So if you can't get ahead and get that tempo, then you might be in a little bit of trouble. Or if your opponent has a lot of direct removal that would kind of circumvent some of the shurikens, then you'll need to continue to try to press for advantage. But I think overall, if you can get some early game units out, Simon is really fun and really good. Definitely more to explore here, though. It seems like they have a pretty wide variety of cards. They're not so shoehorned into a faction or into a certain kind of way of playing, but that's what I have found effective so far.
That's awesome. This could go into another place, like a completely different conversation. Mm-hmm. But something I just want to emphasize is something that you brought up that I discovered throughout this. In the game, one of the things that they've done is for each faction, they have created 6 different starter decks that you can practice with that each emphasize a slightly different type of gameplay style for each faction. And it also involves, each faction has 3 leaders. It involves 2 decks with each leader. So you will get that opportunity. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe this one might just have 3 with 1 leader. The point is that you get 6 decks that you can try out and play for free on practice. And I think that's a really cool thing. With that being said, I just want to make sure that people are aware of that, because if you were exploring this, I did not realize that was a thing until like today. So that's what was actually happening. I thought these were 6 tutorial scenarios. Here, what they are is a tutorial scenario that gives you, I think, access to some cards, and then 5 pre-made decks that you can experiment with and learn with. So I thought that was kind of cool. DBN, you want to take us to the next faction?
Yeah, so let's jump into the faction that I spent most of my time playing and probably will continue spending most of my time playing, which is the Goth clan, which is the orcs. They're orcs. And I felt like I wanted to take the approach of, like, I think each of these factions is at the place where there's enough variety in them, and they've done a couple new like content releases from what I've like looked up, that they're trying to give, like most games, they're trying to give each faction a couple different ways to play. And so I thought that I would sort of quickly overview what stuck out to me as like the main things for this faction. The first being Swarm, which is what I've played the most of, and what I've enjoyed. One of the things that is really cool about this game, Warpforge, and
Warpforge.
It's the Warpforge, and one of the things that's cool is that positioning does matter in this game, which some games do, like Hearthstone, some games don't, and I like when positioning on the board matters. And the Goth clan has some really cool things trying to swarm the board, most notably off of the Tide keyword. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Mark's pulled that up. It is a keyword that allows you to, once you've played the card, usually, I think almost always, a character. Maybe there's a Tide stratagem out there, but I think it's almost always characters or troops. When you play it, it allows you to play it as many more times during that turn as you want. Similar to Echo, which was a keyword in Hearthstone for a while, and we've seen these sort of things in other games. Again, not wholly original, but has been looped in here as a sort of flood the board mechanic with several different ways to access Tide units to get a bunch of little orcs out on the board quickly. There's a lot of buffing of allies, some discounting of troops, and the mob effect, which gives you a certain effect whenever another character attacks. So if you have a character with a cool mob thing, like right now, we have this big mech suit, orc in a mech suit, that has a mob effect where whenever another friendly unit attacks, you get to create a unit in your hand. And there's a lot of effects like that are really cool and built around, like, get a bunch of things out and then drop a mob unit and then attack with all of your little guys and trigger a bunch of effects over and over. Kind of a 1-2 punch there. They also have a lot of things based around what I'm just calling generic big boys, right? Beefy units that are hard to take out with powerful keywords like Vanguard, which is taunt. Again, I'm not going to get into the keyword dilemma, but can we just call taunt? You know what I mean? Or guard. Taunt or guard. That's all I need. They have things like armor, which is an effect that allows you to resist a certain amount of damage. So if you have 3 armor and you take 4 damage, you only take 1.
Minimum
like that.
of 1, though. You always, if you have 5 armor and you only get hit for 1 damage, you will take that point of damage. Armor will never negate everything.
Yeah, it will take it. Yeah, you still, but it'll reduce it. And things like that. So just being able to have a couple big things, usually very pricey, but that have powerful keywords associated with them. They have a really cool, and they seem to be the main faction for buffing your warlord, right? Basically your health pool that can attack, right? And buffing that warlord up, similar to what we've seen in other games like Hearthstone or Duelist, which strengthens the thing that is your win and lose con, or your lose con, and allowing that, to get extra attacks or, more health or whatever. And then finally, they have a really cool, what I think is one of the more interesting things they do, is vehicles / tinkering or inventions, where basically you have a lot of things that are like discount your next vehicle or whatever, which are basically big Mad Max style tanks and jeeps and mech suits and all this sort of cool, hilarious post-apocalyptic orc stuff. A lot of those have different things like charge, or I think it's not actually charge, it's flank. Yeah,
Flank.
Again, it's killing me.
Did you guys know there's two different versions of flank?
No, hold on, Mark, one sec. So we talk about all these keywords that are completely different things, and then flying is flying. You know what I mean? Like, why did that have to be the one that was the same as everything else? Anyways, go ahead. What were you saying?
I was just going to say, the interesting thing is flank, there's two different ones. There's flank and fast. And flank, when it comes down, allows you to attack another person's vehicle or troop. And fast allows you to attack anything. And so
you can
if
hit the
you
warlord.
play something with you cannot attack a warlord with flank on turn 1, but you can attack
it's
a warlord
rush
with
versus
fast
charge
on
in
turn 1.
Hearthstone. Yeah.
Exactly.
I've done that so many times where I'm like, I could drop a unit with flank, and I'm like, why can't I hit the warlord?
I want to hit the
kill him.
warlord.
That's right. There's another one, fast. This one's pretty rare, though. You actually don't see fast a whole lot in the game.
It's pretty
pretty
sparing.
obscure. Yeah.
It's strong.
And the last thing with this that I think is one of the most endearing parts is that they have a negative keyword that is usually assigned to powerful effects or things that are overpowered for their price point. And this negative keyword is unstable, where whenever it dies, it deals a random 0 to 3 damage to its adjacent unit. So you have to pay a price for your, unhinged goblin technology. And so you play out all these cool mech suits and stuff, and they do all really powerful things, but they blow up easily and blow up the things next to them. It's very, very fun. Obviously, you can synergize that with some armor effects on the things next to it if you want to mitigate that. But and I'm still getting into it and learning what things go well together, and my collection is still relatively small. But I can definitely say that if I was going to play this long term, having looked at all the other factions and at least tried the tutorials and played with a starter deck for all the other factions, this is so fun and stands out to me as being one of the most easy to grasp, but has enough meat in there that you can play it a bunch of different ways. Really, really cool faction that I've been enjoying, and has been, if there's anything keeping me in this game so far, and not to be a negative Nancy, right, there are components that I find annoying or grating, but one of the things that does bring me back is these stupid orcs. And I wanna hit people with my angry orcs and blow things up with my stupid goblins, and I'm just like, this is a satisfying experience from a theme perspective.
And I played a little bit of orcs this week because I had to for clearing out a quest, and really I didn't think I'd like it, but I did. I didn't think I'd like it, but I did.
Yeah. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, the first one I'm going to take us to is the one that you get introduced to right at the beginning of the game, and what you might think is the most vanilla of the factions, which is the Ultramarines. These are the last remnant of humans in a post-apocalyptic hellscape many years in the future. These are sword-wielding space fighters in way, way, way too much metal. And they have tanks and ships and all of the stuff. And it is true that what this faction offers is something that is unique, but kind of simple. It offers some stuff that's unique to the game, but the stuff that it offers is certainly not unique to games in general. So I got into the Ultramarines a little bit and began sort of playing around with them. And there's a couple of things that you need to know to decide if you're interested in playing the Ultramarines. And the first thing is that the Ultramarines have this unique keyword that I believe only they have. And I'm going to go ahead and just here for the sake of seeing things. If you're watching, I want to make sure I can pull it up. They have a keyword called codex, and this codex just says it triggers when you spend all of your energy. This deck, this faction wants you to curve out. And if you are the type of player who likes to play in this game, a 2-drop on 2, a 3-drop on 3, a 4-drop on 4, and a 5-drop on 5, so on and so forth, and you like a nice curve to your game, if you were the Hearthstone player that loved that mid-range deck,
Curvestone, baby.
Curvestone, yeah, if you know, because this has a very linear energy system, right? Whereas other games do not have nearly as linear of an energy system. If you were the, Marvel Snap player that liked to just put the big boys down one each round and didn't like swarming the board or doing anything tricky, you will probably like the Ultramarines because they are genuinely very good. The other thing that they have a disproportionate amount of is removal, which realistically, in my experience, the only other faction that has sort of spell-based, or in this case, stratagem-based removal is going to be the Orcs. And the Orcs are mostly random. Like, let's just be real. Most of their stratagems that remove stuff is like they're going to do it at random. And as I say that, I'm pulling up a card that does it at random. But they have cards like this, Death from Above. It's just a 4 energy to deal 4 damage somewhere. It can go anywhere. And they have a lot of cards that are like this.
They do have a lot of that in the Black Legion as well, but it's a little bit different in that there's either some randomness in how much you deal, or in terms of it'll do a lot more like AoE things, like a little bit of damage to everything. And it seems like this faction, the Space Marine people, whatever they're called, they seem to do like big chunks to things.
It's like single target big chunk damage.
And they do have AoE, I'm certain. I've seen it, but I know
that
there's a lot of things like targeted damage, very tactical and strategic, which rhymes with what they're doing, I think.
It's like big target damage and then deals one to like adjacent units.
I mean,
so
Mark
it's still big chunk and focused.
Mark just brought up the every game has one of these.
The Inspired Retribution, the 5 energy destroy an enemy troop, right?
Like every game has a 5 mana destroy a thing.
Dragonfire.
Dragonfire. We've got what was the piercing javelin?
Was a piercing javelin, assassinate.
We got every game has a 5 mana blow something up.
But if you like the 5 mana blow something up and you've enjoyed those cards in all the other games that you've played, well, Ultramarines, guess what? That has it for you. That's where you're going to find it.
That's such a sad, like, convenient theme. Like, I didn't realize there were so many games that had a 5 mana just for remove.
Every one of them. Everybody's got
game
one
that has a mana system. And it's
Does
crazy
this game have
that,
a be prepared?
We're like jaded enough. Jaded is maybe too far, but we're experienced enough. We've seen it all. We're worldly card gamers, and we're starting to notice these design trends.
Yes. So I would say this, just to close up my thoughts on the Ultramarines. These, you might think, are going to be the beefiest things in the game. They are not the beefiest. They look the beefiest. They just look like they have the most armor. They're not going to be your biggest stat sticks in the game. They have some cards that are not bad stat sticks, but they're probably not going to be your best stat sticks in the game. Instead, what they do is they combine both some cards that have really strong stats along with a lot of stratagems that finish targets off or fully remove things from the game, or vehicles that can come in and fly over your opponents, or tanks with armor. And so it is a little bit more of a blended play style, and I've actually found that I like the Ultramarines more than I thought. Like, I found them to have more strategic depth than I thought they were going to have. And so if you like that type of play style, like if you like the go ham, swarm the board, or the huge dudes, this actually is probably not the faction for you. You're probably better off in Hive or in the Orcs. But if you like that sort of combined, like maybe not the biggest stats in the world, but stuff you have to be intentional with, stuff that you be intentional about how you're going to spend your energy that round, and then combining that at the right moment with stratagem or spells that are going to remove stuff from the play that you wouldn't be able to get rid of otherwise, I think that this faction has a lot to offer. So yeah, if you like those things, you'll probably like the Ultramarines. Gibby, why don't you take us to our next faction on our second time around the horn here?
Yeah, sure. So I will be happy to. So my second faction that we're going to talk about here is the Sawtek Dynasty. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Also called the Necrons for sake of ease and use. We're going to call them
We
the
think,
Necrons.
we hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kid you not, when I was trying to better understand some and get some helpful commentary just from external sources, as I was approaching to start playing some of these factions, there were several different like nomenclature that were used in all these different like places that I was like, okay, I can piece together that's that, and by process of elimination, that's got to be that. You can keep that card up, by the way, Mark, because I'm going to talk about that card. The Technomancer.
I think it's a thing where like all Necrons are Sawtek Dynasty, but not all Sawtek Dynasty are Necrons. I think. I think I'm going to take a stab at that. All of you Warhammer fans, correct us. Well, I mean, maybe don't. We probably won't care if you do, unless you're literally Henry Cavill, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, cool. I'll listen to Henry Cavill.
Which I know that he like famously
He's
plays
like a
Warhammer.
famously a Warhammer person,
and he's a Necrons player, I think.
But
too.
barring Henry Cavill, you can try to correct this, but it probably won't stick.
Anyway,
but thanks anyways.
So Necrons are a really interesting faction, and I found myself really enjoying this play style quite a bit. So the overall kind of game plan for the average Necron deck is to utilize flank, being that kind of rush mechanic of get out and be able to challenge something as soon as it comes down in the early game, along with utilizing. It's one of the few factions that I read really likes to utilize your Warlord's pool as a attack resource early on in the game, because the assumption is if you're going to win a game with Necrons, you're probably going to have complete board control and just overwhelm your opponent in the mid to late game. So utilizing your Warlord's health pool really isn't a problem. But utilizing kind of maybe some Vanguard and some regen units in the mid game to kind of build some steam and then eventually steamroll your opponent to where they can't handle you in the late game. Like this faction definitely wants to build a really strong board. They've got great units between the 4 slot and the 7 slot that are just so sticky. And even if they aren't necessarily like sticky in their stats, what they are sticky is one of the keywords that they leave behind, which is Remnant. So Remnant is the other kind of resource, as I talked about with the Asylum Han, where they had the Spirit Stones. Remnant is different, where it leaves a skull down, and there are other cards that allow you to reanimate. They say reanimate as a different like keyword on the card. Allows you to bring back it to full health the card that died as it's sitting on board, and it becomes that unit again. So you have this almost never-ending cycle of powerful units in your deck that you can play out on board and reanimate as long as they continue to create that that kind of skull symbol for you on the board. You can just bring them right back and continue to pile on and put on the pressure. So it's a very I did that
pile on.
It's a very like tempo heavy into the early and mid game. Playing those Vanguard units, the guard units, to be able to protect some of your units and control when they die, and then be able to use those remnants to reanimate them. The Technomancer, the reason I brought that up, this is overwhelmingly one of the most powerful cards that I have found, from both where it's priced, but also just how good it is. The value on this card is awesome. So Artifice, however you want to pronounce Artifice, that's what I'm going to call it.
I think, yeah.
That keyword of every time you play a stratagem, which are spells in this game, you get to reanimate a friendly unit. So you get to choose if there's multiple targets, but there are a lot of very cheap stratagems in this game. One of them is a 0 cost, pick a card that pick from one of 3 cards and put it on the top of your deck. So a search tool that then puts something on the top of your deck to draw next turn and activates or reanimate to make something come back is super, super good. There are a couple other strategies that we'll talk about, but first, the starter deck that I really liked was the Eldritch Artifice, which is the major starter deck that plays off of this regenerate or the reanimate and keywords here, bringing your units back. I think it's a rather intuitive play style that isn't hard to grasp, and I think helps you understand timing and mechanics, especially as it pertains to the Saltec Dynasty and the Necrons here. So I would highly recommend playing that deck to get your hands on not only some good units within the faction, but help understand one of the most powerful keywords that this faction has. Similar to the Orcs, this faction does also have a very well built swarm ability in that Scarab Swarm. They are the 1 attack, 0 range units that you can get a million out on the board of. Pretty much flood your whole board and max out. And there are some cards that will buff your attack, some stratagems that will buff your manual attack for your units to then be able to just ping away, and then refill with more scarabs, like where you pretty much have a full board at all times kind of level. So scarabs, you've got your aggro, you've got your tempo, and they do have some very powerful high-end units, almost kind of like raid boss style, where you've got some cheaper units that maybe aren't so beefy, but then you get your raid bosses that really push them over the edge. So very wide variety in the Saltec Dynasty, a lot of different ways that you can play it, but I think the board-centric version of this faction with the reanimate stuff is really, really fun.
Awesome. DBN, take us to our next faction before I take us to our last one.
You got it. The penultimate faction on this episode is the Black Legion. Black Legion. These guys...
Black Legion.
Oh, well, that's very...
I don't think I'm topping that.
I don't like that.
You like that?
No, I don't.
I liked it.
Well, listen,
I'm
I
going to
think
go
the
back
Black
to my
Legion guys
fun,
would talk
friendly...
like that.
I want to go back to my fun, friendly orcs, okay? You know, they
Shoot.
may be violent and bloodthirsty, but they have a good time. These guys never seem like they're having a good time. Can I just throw that out there? So the Black Legion is interesting. I think from a lore perspective, they were like a group of Ultramarine or a subdivision of Ultramarines that left, I don't know, whatever the good guy side is, and now use the powers of like eldritch deities through the warp or something. And they have all these legionnaires that basically utilize the powers of chaos gods. And so naturally, a lot of the things that you'll see in the Black Legion are things that are showcasing their origins in the Ultramarines, and also, obviously enhanced with skull or tentacle or whatever aesthetics, right, based on. And I think that there's like 4 different eldritch deities that I can never figure out what they are because it doesn't tell us. That's a lore problem, though. What's interesting about this, and I'll be honest, I fell in love with the orcs, and I did the bare minimum of playing this to feel like I could talk about that, and it really was the bare minimum, which is playing a couple of the starter decks. But so now that I've got that out of the way, what I did notice was a few key archetypes which seem to be either melded together in a couple different situations, or focused towards one of them, even if there are cards within that are added in from one theme to another. The first being what seems to be the most prominent, which is buffing. And that comes in a few different forms, but this faction really likes to buff up and mutate and whatever, enhance through eldritch powers their guys. So you see a lot of dudes with giant crab claws or tentacle arms or whatever, and they're really leaning into that idea of like they're getting these dark pacts, which there are 4 different dark pacts, which is a way for you to enhance. Now, it is a theme in and of itself, in that there are cards that say you get this specific dark pact, or there are some where get a random dark pact, and it's usually a small buff that goes on to a troop. And it'll be things like +2 attack and a keyword, or +1/+1, or whatever. They're small, but they add up. And there are synergies of things that say your characters or your troops with Dark Pact get another bonus, or can do something special. There are things that say, give an additional bonus to somebody with a Dark Pact, or for each Dark Pact, troop or whatever. So there's a lot of synergy there. And there's also just a lot of synergy around things that are buffing up your stuff. In many ways, this kind of reminded me of Hearthstone's Priest faction a little bit, in that they even have cards like double a character's stats. So you buff it up and then double it, things that we've seen in Priest before. They also have a subdivision of things that are very clearly based around stratagems and dealing damage to things through those sort of chaos energies. Things like dealing 3 to 6 damage to 3 random enemies, right? Obviously leaning into the chaos component of things, and also leaning into the more sorceress aspect of these, the rituals or whatever. You do have some things that are pretty standard affair that other factions have. Deal 2 to all units. There's one of those in the Ultramarines as well. But you do have a lot of this stuff that is like, I'm controlling the board, I'm stopping my enemy from what they're doing, and you see things also that synergize with dealing damage, both to your stuff a little bit, and I think that is likely, from my perusing, that seems to be a sort of a component within the faction that is less explored, and I would not be surprised to see them get some like, I'm dealing damage to my own thing in a ritual and then buffing up something else or getting some sort of effect. There remains a few situations where that's the case, but it is not that fleshed out yet. However, there's a lot that says things like, did you whenever you damage an enemy, get a bonus. Or this is the faction that seems to have the execute ability. I think it's even 2 cost, like execute in Hearthstone, and like execute in Elder Scrolls Legends. But fortunately in Lorcana it's 3 cost. But anyways, like destroy a damaged unit. I think it's called execution in this game. But we see a lot of those things: destroy damaged enemies, win damage, AoE, and that is a lot of what this faction wants to do. It's in many ways made me think of Priest, in that you damage your own things so that you can heal them for effects. You're not really healing here. But you're also doing a ton of AoE-based damage, which is, again, similar to what we saw in Hearthstone's Priest, and, of course, the buffing of your own units. It felt very familiar. Now, granted, Gibby was the Priest player. I was not, so it didn't really stick with me very much. The only thing I wanted to throw out as well that I have in my notes here, which is just a one-off thing that I wrote down because I thought it was funny, there's a card in here called Khorne Berserker. And of course, corn is spelled in a fantasy way, but then I just think of the idea of an enraged corn cob man. So just wanted to throw that out there. There is a card in this faction called Khorne Berserker. Enjoy. Mark,
so if you're the person who likes to play corn cards, this is the place for you.
That's right. Mark, go ahead and just tell us about this last faction here.
Yeah, I'm going to bring us home, and we are going to talk about the Hive faction. This is your Predator meets Alien faction that we talked about last week. The one that I was excited to talk about and play, and I did play it a decent amount this week. I will say that I found this faction to be a little bit more basic than what I thought it was. I actually thought that the Ultramarines that they introduced you to was going to be the faction that was kind of like just the play it out and fill the board and that's it. And this faction was going to have a little bit more to it. What I found is the opposite was true. I think that there was actually more to do with stratagem and removal and things with the Ultramarines, whereas this kind of combines the orcs' ability to swarm the board with big boys. So specifically, it's going to give you a couple of abilities. Tide, which we talked about already, and one, I just want to make a quick correction. DBN did say it allows you to play it an unlimited amount of times, which I don't know if maybe that is on a couple of cards, but like most of the tides have a number after, which tells you how many times it will replace itself.
Yeah.
So you get tides that allow you to put them out, but then they also have this other ability called Swarm that when you play it on the left side of the troop with the same name, it is combined with it, adding its stats. So for example, if you were to get a couple out, you could build up one big boy if you felt like your opponent was dealing with a wide board but maybe couldn't deal with a really tall board. And so that allows you to build sort of like one really large threat. And the really cool thing is a lot of those Tide cards have Swarm as well, which means, you play like the one I have here, which I get Termagant, I get Termagnet. I don't even know. But it's a 2 mana, 1/2, or I guess it's a 1 attack, 2 attack with 2 health. With Tide 3 and Swarm. And so if you're on, round 8 and you're going to get 3 additional of these in your hand as you play them, you can play 4 of these suckers and it would come out as a 4/8 on attack with 8 health, which is a really tall card. When you would normally be drawing a useless 2-drop, you can now drop a really powerful 8-drop on turn 8 when you top deck this guy. I think that in of itself makes the Hive pretty strong.
And you can split those. So if you wanted to go 4 wide or 2 and 2 or just all in one, like there's some cool
if you don't have to commit.
Functionality there that is neat because of the way that the board spacing is structured.
Yep, it is very cool. The other thing that it has is Synapse, which is when a unit is targeted by a friendly stratagem, adjacent units are affected by that stratagem as well. So if you swarm, target someone with Synapse, it's going to, spread that out. And that can be quite powerful with the right stratagem, right? Because there's one in this game, in this faction, that makes your characters are immune to damage for a turn. It's 5, it's pretty expensive, but if you get it on 3 things, it's pretty nice. It does have some artifice from also the sort of like the Technomancers faction that you can get in. And then the other thing that's really unique about this faction is there's a really strong grouping of stealth cards. And in this game, you cannot be targeted for a turn if you have stealth, even if you attack. So what I like about this is in other games, stealth lasts the first turn they're played, and they have summoning sickness, basically protecting them for a turn. That will work in this case, but also if you can find a way to give one of your characters stealth, they can attack and not lose it, and they just can't be attacked for a turn. And so you can actually give something stealth, attack with it, and they cannot be attacked the next turn. That creature does not lose stealth just because it attacks, which I think is an interesting play with stealth that isn't common. The other thing that I found out that was quite powerful, both in this faction and in the Technomancers, is regeneration in this game works different than it does in other games, because you regen health at the end of turn instead of the beginning of turn, and you regen health at the end of each turn, including your opponent's turn, which does make regeneration, there's like 1 or 2 cards that have it in this faction, does make regeneration a lot more powerful. There's one in this that specifically has like regeneration 3, super hard to get rid of if you're not going to take him out in one hit. He has 8 health, and then he deals damage equal to his health. And I'm now saying that and wondering if it's actually not in this faction and it's in the Necromancer faction. Now I'm questioning myself. But either way, I found this faction to be fun, but what it doesn't have is all of its stratagems basically just buff its board, right? It's going to protect its creatures, increase their health, increase their attack. It is not very interactive. Like, you very rarely have any way to do anything to your opponents without attacking them directly. And so if you are like the type of person who likes to play your own game plan, and you like to create an overwhelming board state that your opponent cannot deal with, and you like to play around board wipe cards that some of the other factions have, I think that orcs have like the 7 mana destroy all, it's like the Wrath of God, which is really interesting. If you like that type of gameplay, I think you're really going to like the Hive. I like having a little bit more interaction with my opponent, and this doesn't really give me any of that, but it is a cool faction. And I think that its most powerful ability is sort of the flexibility of Swarm in combination with Tide. Those 2 abilities are really quite cool. I honestly think that after I've played this game for a little bit, the Tide is maybe the keyword that I would love to see in other games. It's better than Echo, in my opinion, because it is limited in scope because they put the number on it. And I think I just like it a lot. I think from what I've played, I think that it would be cool to see it.
it does feel like they had a clearer design space for Tide in this game than I saw in Hearthstone with Echo, where it was kind of like, let's just throw Echo on a few things, and then some of them become broken, and some of them become unplayable. And this, it's very rooted in the gameplay mechanic for the factions that have it. So, Orcs and Hive, it feels very authentic to those factions and feels directly tied into other mechanics going on in the background with or without the Tide. So I totally agree. If there's anything, like, they maybe elevated what is a keyword we've seen elsewhere and a mechanic we've seen elsewhere, that feels like one of the only keywords that actually feels like elevated by Warpforge. So congrats to them, because they did
fresh.
It well.
Yeah, or fresh. I would say the Ultramarines ability, like, once you play, you use all your mana each round. I'm not sure that's a cool keyword, but you don't see that a lot in other factions or in other games. Like the really benefiting you from curving out super well. So I do think that one is a little unique, and obviously, like, the reanimation stuff is kind of like a way to do graveyard mechanics without having a graveyard that you're doing mechanics with. It's like a one-turn graveyard mechanic, which is kind of interesting. So ultimately, there's some stuff that the game offers, and also, obviously, a few things that we have liked this week, some things that we haven't liked this week. And we want to turn the conversation now, as we get ready to land the plane, to exactly that. You guys have played it for a week now. Next week, we're going to make kind of a final verdict on it. You've played it for another week. Give me some thoughts, and DBN, I'll go to you first. What are some things or places that this game has grown on you with? And what are some areas that maybe you've been like, maybe this isn't for me?
Truthfully, I think as far as this game goes, like, it was a fun little dive into a few new mechanics. The melee range thing is unique, but it fades after a while, truthfully. I like I mentioned earlier, I think the only thing really keeping me engaged through this month is the faction and the factional chart in terms of getting progress, which clearly is something that they're strong at because they understand the factional loyalty of their fan base. And even I can find myself gravitating towards one. And I'm like, if I was going to make a Warhammer army for whatever reason, if in my lifetime I get drawn into that, I know now which faction it would be. Because you have that calling where, like, this aesthetic, the voice lines.
They do a good job with that. Like, the pulling you in with the loyalty to a faction. They do a better job than that in a lot of places.
But I think that is not enough to overcome what is very middle of the road, bordering on low tier visuals. An outdated, monetary system, which we will get into a little bit more detail next week, and just as a final verdict. And I don't really feel fully prepared to critique it, but so far I've not been, like, super impressed. And then especially just that the gameplay does not feel overly original. Yes, there are things that we like and we've hit on and been like, this is cool. But I mean, I hate to say it, but Hearthstone clones are a dime a dozen to us these days. We're jaded digital gamers. You have to do something to impress us and to make us, something that stands out if we're going to stick around. And I found myself booting up DC Dual Force more frequently than I found myself, like, getting excited to boot up Warpforge. And that game's dead, and this game's not. But I'm just saying, like, you need to do something different for me to go, whoa, I need to explore this, and for it to tickle that part of your brain that's like, this is something novel and new. And I want to get that rush of exploring something for the first time, and this does not give me that. I feel like I've seen this all before. This is a reskin of stuff I've done before. Nothing here is going to... I think if this had a major competitive scene, there would be value to it for some players. Maybe probably not me, but, like, it's a complex enough game that skill expression is extremely apparent. But, I mean, it's just not unique enough to keep capturing me, I think. So I'm, there are parts I like. Again, it's not a full negative review, but I don't know if I'll be sticking with this after the month is over.
Gibby, how about you? Thoughts after another week?
More enticed by it than I was originally. I think the gameplay and some of the keywords in the wide card pool is intriguing to me. and I'm still very new into the game, so from the grand scheme of a player perspective, so I am enjoying continuing to explore, continuing to gain a card pool. There's something about the collection of the cards that we all, I think, kind of really enjoy. So opening up packs and trying to see what cards you end up pulling and creating cards. I've been playing a lot of the what's been given to you stuff just to get my feet wet with the existing factions, but there is going to be something. I think a new component of building a deck with things that end up making my way into my collection based off of the packs that I open or what I acquire. That will be a whole new challenge, and the challenge is sometimes half the battle with building decks in these turn-based card games. We've talked about it before. The gameplay isn't anything that is so outstanding that that will be enough to keep me. But we'll see how enticed I am by what I'm able to kind of put together, and if there is a faction and maybe I find something that I really like that ends up kind of keeping me going, especially since this is a very much a loyalist kind of game where they really a lot of players end up kind of sticking to a faction. There might be something that just I haven't played yet that entices me so greatly that I continue to want to explore that. And I think there's a possibility with that because there are such a wide card pool within each faction. So I think they've built the foundation to keep players if they're interested enough in something in particular about the game, but they're not going out of their way to give you everything to entice you to stay. Like, they're not doing anything over the top. There's no additional side modes. There's no unique aspects and unique kind of subverted looks at the game to say, here, I'm going to put this cool twist on it and make you love the game that much more because you can see how deep and diverse it is. So at the end of the day, the gameplay is what rules, and we'll see if it's enough to hold our attention.
So my closing thoughts for this week after another week of playing are better than what they were last week. I agree with DBN and with Gibby that in many ways this is a quote-unquote Hearthstone clone. It is no different than anything I've done before. At the same time, it's a really freaking good one in terms of the amount of depth and complexity they've gotten into this game, that there's this little part of me that's like, but if I stick around, I could really learn this game deeply. Like, I don't feel like I've bumped into it and been like, oh, okay, yeah. It doesn't feel like that easy to learn, hard to master that card games brag so much about. I feel like this is hard to learn, hard to master, quite frankly, when it comes to Hearthstone clones. And I like that. I actually find that to be kind of refreshing. I find myself building some faction loyalty, and I did not expect that to happen. I have a new pet peeve, and that is you cannot reroll quests in this game, and that's ridiculous. And how is that not an option? How because I'm getting quests to get faction tokens for a faction I'm trying to unlock, but I have to go play another faction because the quest that I have is for a keyword that's not in the faction that I want to play. That ticks me off. The daily skulls, I think that's kind of cool. Honestly, most card games punish you for playing their game more than 10 wins a day. And this game doesn't do that. Like, this game wants you to play a lot, and it allows you to earn those skulls for winning in just PvE. And so I can sit there and play some PvE games on the couch without getting stressed out or trying to craft a deck. This is the first card game that I haven't just bypassed PvE and immediately went and said, how can I craft a deck and get into a game against a real person? Every card game I play, that's what I want to do. This is the first card game in a long time that I've said, I am not ready to craft a deck. I am not ready to touch the deck manager. I'm going to play some PvE games for a while and learn the game a little bit more. That is pretty uncommon for me in card games at this point. Like, most card games, I can pretty much wrap my brain around by scrolling through the card list if it's a new game. And I can pretty much know what I want to play, and I can pretty much get ready to go to build what I think will be a relatively competitive deck. And I'm not bragging, it's just like, I played a lot of card games, and this game I don't feel that way with. I'm actually intimidated by this game in week 2. And I'm not sure that's a good thing, but it isn't hurting my interest in it at this point. It hurt my interest in week 1.
Let me pitch you on something that I think, just real fast, and then we got to get out of here, I think. But, I think a big reason why I felt similar, and that, like, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to touch the deck builder too much. I've, like, tinkered with a few things when I saw I pulled a cool card, right? But, like, part of why for me, part of why I found that to be the case is the overabundance of keywords being shorthand for things and trying to learn the keywords. And the artwork on the cards, while cool, when scaled down to a small size, begin to blur together. And that is
it's hard
something,
to remember what is what.
It's hard to remember what card is what. It's hard to like, oh, this is the card that I like playing on 2 every turn. Oh, this is a different 2-drop. They're very similar looking. Especially, again, one of my criticisms from last episode, when the game board takes up significantly more screen space than any of the individual cards. Like the background it's just a poor use of screen space. I think the card artwork is nice when big, and it's almost always tiny. And so I have a big problem with that in terms of like none of the cards does my visual shorthand kick in, and I'd be like, that's the card that does this thing. I have to read every single card, and it's like, you know, for something like Lorcana or Pokemon where I'm holding it in my hands and I can look at it full size, I eventually stop needing to know the text on Iono or the text on, you know, Chin-Pao, because not only have I played it, but like I see it and it codes to my brain file of what the heck does this thing do? What does the weird like snow leopard thing with giant sword teeth do? Oh, I remember. And so, you know, but like I'm not getting that. I'm not building that because the artwork is small and so detailed that like the things blend together. The Chaos Marines are the worst of that for me. Like the Chaos Marines all look vaguely the same for the most part, at least to my eyes. So anyways, I'll just throw that out there. That's been the reason for me that I haven't gotten much deeper.
I mean, in the first 12 cards in Ultramarines, there is one of the first 12 that isn't just a dude in bulky blue armor carrying a gun or a sword. And so, it's hard to know what the heck you're even looking at. Honestly, it's hard to know what even the difference between a stratagem and an infantryman is.
Yeah, I wish they'd formatted those differently.
Yeah. I have other pet peeves about the formatting of the cards. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that looks like it's text on the cards that is just the name of the card and a keyword for the card and a faction for the card that doesn't actually do anything mechanically in game, and it makes the cards look more complex than what they actually are. Get some of that crap out of there, put them in different locations, all that sort of stuff. That's all design critique. But yeah, I think that's my final thoughts this week. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We appreciate you. As always, we hope that you're enjoying the starter set because we are enjoying the starter set. And if you're checking out Warpforge, stop by our Discord server and let us know that you're checking it out. Beyond that, check us out on YouTube because we have a YouTube channel now, and the link to that is found in the description of this episode. And you can grab some more content of us playing Warpforge amongst other games, other card games of all sorts over on our YouTube channel. Go and check Camp Legend out on YouTube. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening, and be sure to come back again next episode.